Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Adventures of a Real Estate Investor. I'm Susie.
And I'm Michael. We're excited you joined us for this adventure.
So today's very special guest is John Casmon. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Hey, Susie and Michael, I'm excited to be here. Thank you for having me. I can't wait to talk to all of your listeners today.
Yeah, and we're super excited too. I mean, we have seen you in the space a lot. We've heard you on podcasts a lot. So it's going to be like such a joy for you to share all of the great knowledge you have, because I know I've heard it. So now other people get to hear it too. And it's just super, super awesome. So thank you again.
Yeah, absolutely. Hopefully we can talk about something different than anything I've shared before. So I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, John, before we get started with this amazing conversation, would you mind sharing with our adventurous family and a little bit more about your background and like why you started investing in real estate?
Yeah, absolutely. The 30-second story for me is I was in corporate America, like many other people, working a 9 to 5, trying to climb the corporate ranks. And I got just a shock really from what I was going through and realized living the corporate life was not going to be the best path forward for me. And I needed to start to find other options that I could take more control over my life, my time, and spending that time with my family. So started to invest in real estate, started with just a 2-unit or duplex. I went from that to a 3-unit, then to an 8-unit building, started trying to figure out how to actually scale this thing. And that ultimately led me into syndications. Fast forward, and we've invested in over $100 million worth of apartments with our passive investors. We've done that as general partners in these deals. And we continue to partner with other investors who, are busy professionals, like their job, or maybe they don't like their job, but they've got some money and looking to find a way to really pursue their passions through passive income.
That's awesome. Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing that. That's a very concise intro there. I want to step back a little bit. I mean, you said you wanted to find a way, to kind of get out of the corporate America and stuff like that. What was the main pain point? You mentioned a couple of things there. Was it the time freedom, or was it
just what you were in?
Yeah, just a job.
Yeah.
Or what?
It evolved over time. So first of all, I loved my career. I was doing marketing. I was doing this fun stuff, man. I was going to the Super Bowl. I was going to Maxim Hot 100 parties. I was going to Buick Open, and I was really enjoying life. We're doing a great time. I had 2 major problems though. 2 of the companies that I worked for actually went through bankruptcy. And the first one was a very public bankruptcy with General Motors. So you saw that on TV every day. And I just remember the anxiety I felt as a young corporate professional. I was just a couple of years out of college for me. So being there and going through that, looking at my peers, my bosses, the anxiety level of not knowing what was going to happen, it just ate at me. I was trying to figure out what to do. I didn't even realize there was like a greater economic recession happening. For me, it was just, I saw my company that I work for on the news every single day. Every single day I watched my company, and you can imagine what that does to, the culture and to the psyche of the employees. And it wasn't until we got clarity that we were going to go into a structured bankruptcy, that I was going to be okay, I was going to have my job, that I could actually focus on the work. I remember having a conversation with one of my directors, and she told me, hey, just keep your head down, do your job, don't worry about it, everything's gonna be fine. And literally that evening, I see her on, I think it was like CNN or something like that. And she's like, oh, if we don't sell 15 million vehicles, we're gonna have to, file bankruptcy. And I was like, whoa, you just told me to keep my head down, things are cool. Right. And here you are a few hours later telling the world that if we don't hit a certain number, we're going to be bankrupt. And I'm like, wow. So I remember going to my boss. My boss basically told me, John, if you're not looking for another job at this time, you're not smart enough to work for me. Right. And obviously everyone was at that moment. But as you could imagine, there was a greater economic recession. I was updating resumes, talking to people, and it was the same kind of story. And I just remember feeling hopeless, and helpless, not knowing what was going to happen. There was a guy who worked with me who he got let go, unfortunately, during one of the layoffs. And he had not planned for it. He was a lifer, had worked for the company for 22 years and had planned on retiring from the company. And he was completely devastated. And I recall that was the first time I was like, okay, I got to do something different. I don't want to be in those shoes. I don't want to get caught. I don't want to be here thinking I'm a lifer, or any company for that matter, thinking I'm a lifer, and then somebody just decides I'm not their guy, or something happens with the company, or technology takes over, or whatever, right? And now I'm sitting here trying to figure out what I'm going to do for the rest of my life. So that was the first time that I really said, okay, I need to figure out a way to take control. And I realized that real estate was the thing that I felt I could do. I was still in Detroit. This is like now 2010, 10-ish, right? And while I was interested in investing in real estate, everyone I knew who had real estate was trying to sell it at, crackhead fire style prices. So I'm like, probably not the best time to buy if the market's still sinking. Again, I didn't know enough at that time, but I ended up moving to Chicago, took a year to learn the market, and then finally started investing there.
So I have a question, like even geared around, I guess, pain points kind of. So like that whole experience happened to you, but then like so many people still associate like 2008 with a pain point with like housing. And that can also contribute to multifamily, depending on what you think housing means. What made you think though, like multifamily was okay? Because a lot around that recession, people can blame it on whatever they want, right? Some people blamed it on president. Some people blamed it on housing. Some people blamed it on whatever. But like when I think about it, I'm like, he went from one pain point to what other people would think is another pain point, because that's going like into housing. So how did you, I guess, tell yourself like, no, this isn't what people think it is? Like I can do so much good in multifamily. And then how multifamily out of everything? Yes, I know you started with a duplex, but how do you then decide like, okay, if I'm going to continue to diversify, because single family and multifamily are completely different. How did you continue then into multifamily?
Yeah, great question there. And I think from your viewpoint, it's an obvious question. So it's a really great question, right? Why would you go from one industry or one pain point into another area that's experiencing a similar pain point? The first answer for you is I didn't realize that, and ignorance is a great thing. Keep in mind,
Yeah.
when you're in a fire, if you're at the center of the storm, you can be a bit oblivious to everything else going around. And it's not to say that I didn't know what was going on. It's to say that I lived in Detroit working at an automotive company during this time frame. The housing crisis, I was a renter at that time. I didn't care about the housing crisis.
Mhm.
Okay.
I cared about the automotive industry because that's what I saw on the news. And I wasn't looking to buy a house. And ultimately, I knew people needed a place to live. I lived in an apartment building, and the apartments that I saw had a bunch of cars in the parking lot still. So, and I knew my rent was still going up, wasn't going down. So for me, that felt right. The other thing is understanding why my initial trigger ultimately went to real estate first, as opposed to some other asset class. Like many people, I had read Rich Dad, Poor Dad years earlier. And one of the things it talks about is, obviously investing in real estate. But the other thing it talks about is working to develop a skill, not just to get promoted. And at that moment, I said, you know what? There was a lot of insights in that book that I haven't been practicing. And as I looked around at my colleagues who were looking at just getting promoted, I realized, you know what? Do this marketing thing, get good at the skill, develop that skill, but don't get caught up in being a vice president of marketing at whatever firm. Like that doesn't matter. So the real estate to me was really the simplest way for me to invest. I couldn't quite, master the stock market or understand the stock market like that. I wasn't tech savvy to go and create the next great app or something like that. So real estate's a pretty basic, simple thing that everyone can invest in. Out of those books that I've read, the meetups I attended, which I think at that time were just RIAs, everyone I knew was investing in small multifamily in that space. And almost everyone had said, they started in single family, but they wish they moved to multifamily earlier. So for me, I was like, all right, well, let's just start in multifamily. And then because I moved to Chicago, where there's a plethora of 2 to 4 unit properties, and there actually aren't as many single family properties, that became the easiest way to invest. Now you fast forward and you add the fact that one of the best strategies is to invest in an owner occupied 2 to 4 unit property where you can get FHA financing, which is, you only have to put 3.5% down, at least at the time, 3.5% down. I can buy, a $200,000 property with $7,000, right? I looked at what I was paying in rents and I said, man, I could just save up my rent checks for 6 months, buy a place, and essentially be positive within a year.
Yeah.
This didn't require a whole bunch of, math skills and all that. This wasn't a deep analysis to understand that I would be better suited buying a 2 to 4 unit, living in one of those units, renting out the other units, as opposed to paying $1,500 in rent each month and having nothing to show for it. Right. So When you break it down and make it easy to take that next step, it becomes much easier. You don't have to overthink it. And I'm very grateful that I wasn't sitting here thinking about the housing market and all that stuff. What I will say though, is that I had already made that decision. I was, that boat was gone. It was the but while I was looking for the property to buy though, I did a ton of research on properties and neighborhoods and all that kind of stuff. And that's really where I sharpened my skills on what to look for in a neighborhood. And the thing that jumped out to me in Chicago in particular, there are 77 distinct neighborhoods in Chicago. Only one of them didn't lose any value during that economic downturn. Mm-hmm. So for me, that was like, huge neon signs pointing to me saying, this is the neighborhood you want to invest in.
Yeah.
And I just, my whole criteria changed. And I said, we're going to buy something in this neighborhood. If it didn't lose value in 2009, 2010, I feel like that is the best way for me to invest on my first investment. And I can sleep at night knowing that, hey, at a minimum, I picked what feels like a Teflon type of neighborhood. And that's exactly what I did.
That's awesome. That's awesome, John. Thanks for sharing. There's a couple of things I want to highlight for our listeners out there. One of the things that John mentioned was, building life skills or skills that can be translated kind of, inside your job you're actually working for and also outside, right? So like, it's kind of like what Susie has mentioned before. It's like detaching yourself from your identity,
your job.
Detaching your identity from your job. And when you take a step back, you're like, okay, I'm not trying to be the vice president of whatever. I'm just trying to build these skills that I can take anywhere. I mean, apply them anywhere. That's a huge thing because a lot of people get wrapped up in trying to get promoted to this certain job position. So that's really cool. I like how you said that, John. Another thing I want to point out is like, you mentioned that real estate is simple. It is so simple, right? But it's not easy. It can be easy, but it is so simple, right? And we can get into that later too. The last thing I want to mention too is like you mentioned, saving up and using an FHA loan, 3.5% down for a 2 to 4 unit, which is even cooler for the veteran listeners out there right now. If you're not aware of this, you can also get a VA loan on up to 4 units because it's still considered residential and you put zero money down. So if you're not doing that as a veteran now, please look into that because now you can live in one of the units and rent out the other 3. Yes. So you're taking us on this journey, John. And now I've highlighted those points and we move forward. I want to know at what point did you realize, hey, this is something that I can, make quite a bit of money at now and it kind of replaced my traditional income now with this entrepreneurial life, if you will.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the biggest thing for me was, that first deal had to be a good deal, right? Because it wasn't that I set out to say, I'm going to be a full-time real estate investor. That wasn't the goal starting out. The goal was, you know what? I can't rely solely on my W-2 job. I need to find another way to make some money, right? And I'm making decent money now. How do I stretch that? How do I double that? How do I make this work for me? That's where real estate came in. And the first thing, like I said, was I needed a place to live. House hacking is what they call it now. But doing that was a very logical approach. What happened for me where we really turned up the dial on investing is we decided to, that was going well. We did some renovations on that property. And 2 years later, we're going to have our first son. And we wanted to invest in a property to just start getting the snowball continue to roll, wanted more passive income. I really didn't want to lose money, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. I knew my expenses would start to increase. So I kind of wanted to just have something to offset the cost of having a child. So we went out and we saved money. We invested in another property. But as we went through that process, we were talking to our agent and she was telling us that we probably had enough equity in our home to refinance and pull out some of that. I would thought she was, I didn't believe her. I said, oh, okay, sure. And she's like, no, I'm serious. I think you have a considerable amount of equity. Well, she was right. We did a refinance and we actually did a line of credit and we had 6 figures worth of equity built into this property. Mm-hmm. So to go from buying this property with an FHA loan, 3.5% down, I think we put like 10,500 down, to creating 6 figures of equity in about 18 months. That was like mind blowing to me. I mean, that was more than I made in a year. We were just sitting there like, what? I thought, I had to double check the report. My wife called me when she got it, like, yo, did you see this? And I was like, oh my goodness. Like, is this true? Like, was there a mistake? And
right? Is
I'm
it too
saying,
many zeros? What happened?
yeah, when I'm saying the equity, I'm talking about the part that we could take out. I'm saying was six figures, right? It was more than that. It was almost like 200K, but we could actually take out a line of credit for over 100K. So that just opened the door. And for me, it was like, we just made about 100K, more than that actually, but we made that in about 18 months with not that much work. I mean, to be all honest, we didn't do that much work. And I'm like, okay, now I understand why real estate. Now I get why so many wealthy individuals invest in real estate. We bought the 3-unit building. And at that point, my mind's just racing. How do I scale this? How do I build something more? How do I do more of these kind of deals? It takes us a little while to save up our money because my wife and I are just using all of our money at this point. So we're saving, we're living below our means. Again, we live in one unit, we rent out the other unit. So we're doing everything we can to live below our means. We end up buying an 8-unit building. And I remember at that moment, I was excited, but also dejected. Excited that we had finally bought our first commercial property, dejected because it took me probably 18 months to find that 8-unit building or to save the money, I should say, to buy that 8-unit building. And the thought of sitting around and saving for another 12 to 18 months to be able to buy another property was dejecting. It was just like, oh, man, I want to sit around and wait again. I want to do this again. I want to grow, because I felt like I found something that we could scale and build, but I was restricted by whatever I had in my own bank account. And I remember at that time, what really happened for us was I was now talking to people who had scaled their companies. I had a friend who went from 9 units to 90 units in about 12 months. And I just thought that was crazy. I sat her down for breakfast. I just asked her flat out, how did you do it? I thought she got a big windfall of money. Maybe somebody died in her family. I don't know. And she told me she started working with other people. And I said, wow, okay. I was completely against it. Not for, the reasons I think people normally have. I didn't want to be responsible for other people's money. And I just felt like, I thought investing was about you and what you do. You take your money, you buy whatever you can buy with your money. And what really happened for me over the next couple of months is I had a big shift in my thinking. And I realized that when you partner with other people, you're actually helping other people who maybe, like yourselves, you're in the UK, right? So it may be challenging to invest in the States. It may be people who are on the coast who can't invest in their backyard, but they want to partner with somebody who's local and boots on the ground. I have friends and family who, I was sharing what I was doing, excited because we made all this money, right? Or at least was a lot of money at the time. And I would tell them, hey, here's what we did. Here's how we did it. And I would just get glossy eyes. They would be like, yeah, I'm not about to do all of that. How many books did you read? How many events did you go to? How many podcasts did you? I'm not doing all of that to learn. I'm like, no, I'll tell you how to do it. And they're like, yeah. How about you just do it? And then maybe you find something, maybe I can, throw some money at it. And when I started to hear that a couple of times, I realized, okay, there's a way to help people in my circle while also helping myself, and I'll benefit. But this is bigger than just me. And I think that really shifted to say, okay, now we can make a viable business out of this, as opposed to me just, being a squirrel trying to, grab my acorns and seeing how many deals and properties I can gather.
So when you initially said it was like thinking about working with other people was almost mind blowing, how long did it take you then to, I guess, passively invest for your first time? Because although some people in your circle, they were like, oh, if you have money or if you have a deal, like I'll bring money to it. But I almost feel like once you get to that step, you're like, okay, I'm working as a team as an active investor. Getting to passive, some people are passive first and then active, and some people aren't. But trusting them, a whole nother team to do a deal when it was already weird to trust another team with your deal, it's like a little bit, I think, more challenging. How did you get to that spot?
Yeah, I don't know if I did. I was always active, but I'll tell you too, it was a mistake. We'll go back to that in a second. But what happened for me was, after talking to the partner, the woman I just mentioned to you, I actually started to, the seed was planted. And I'm like, okay, I've read about this. I've heard many people talk about it. Stop being stubborn, because you're not going to hit your goals if you just try to do it by yourself. Everyone tells you multifamily investing is a team sport. It's true. You got to understand that there's truth to that and open yourself up to it. What ended up happening next is I kind of just happened to, well, I guess I shouldn't say just happened. I intentionally sought out people who were investing in the markets that I was looking to invest in. One of those individuals ended up becoming my coach. And as we sat down for lunch and talked, and he told me more about what he was doing and how he was doing it and how he helps other people do it, it became clear to me that, hey, this can help me. Because one of the reasons I had reservations about working with other people is I didn't know what I didn't know. And I was humble enough to recognize that there was a bit of luck involved in that first deal I mentioned, right? I bought that in 2012. I bought it in a great neighborhood in 2012. The market did the majority of that lift. We certainly did some renovations that drove up the value, and we kind of knew what we wanted to do to the property, but the market took it to the extreme, that it went to. It wasn't that John had that foresight. If I did, I would have emptied every account that I could find and bought as much property as possible at that time, right? So it's not to say like John was some huge genius. It's that I recognized there was an element of my success that was driven by luck, and I didn't know what part. And I didn't know if I could confidently replicate that. And I wanted to surround myself with people who could help me decipher that, understand what worked in what I did, what probably will not work going forward, and ultimately have the resources in my corner so that as I'm working with potential investors, I could address any questions they have and make sure that I'm just continuing to invest in myself. So I hired a coach that helped me get over the hump. And what ended up happening is I ended up partnering with another group who he was coaching. We just got together, we connected, had a great vibe. They had a deal that made a lot of sense for us. At that time, I had been talking to a lot of people in my network about investing in a deal. So we ended up partnering with them. And that was really how we kind of got over that hump, did that first deal. And that was, really kicked us off into doing more larger deals.
I love it. That's awesome. That's such an incredible story you've shared so far. Yeah.
Because getting over the humps, that's the hard part, right? It's like getting past, because even saying this earlier, like a pain point is a pain point, doesn't matter if it's big or small, like it's really difficult to get past and to get over and then continue to do so. But it's also amazing to know that just like trusting the process. Michael and I almost say this like every day, actually, right? It's just like trusting the process, although it's like uncomfortable because you don't necessarily see what tomorrow is. It's just trusting that everything is going to like work because you put in that little bit of research to find the area that worked. You put the research into knowing more about your coach and who that person was going to be, and then putting in the research to become partners with that group of people. No matter what you do that's new, exploring it more is putting in a little more research. And like, that's the biggest part. That's where it goes back to those life skills, like where we're putting in a little bit of research to learn something new and learn a new skill about us, about ourselves, about other people. It literally all comes together. But again, you just have to trust the process because we never are going to know, but it's nice to know that we have there are a little bit of like check marks, or it feels like we're going in the right direction for a long ways because everybody feels like they're going in the right direction some way or another. It doesn't mean you always know what tomorrow is.
That's right. Susie, to your point, that's exactly what happened. You talk about the pain point. To be more direct, that's exactly what happened is when I talk about feeling dejected, part of me stepped back and said, okay, over the last 4 or 5 years, my wife and I have saved up probably $300,000 of cash to invest in apartment buildings. Yet I didn't have the cash flow to represent that. And here I was like, oh, and now I'm going to go save another 6 figures to try to do this again. And I was like, this is no longer fun. I'm excited about what I'm doing, but the pain point was I didn't want to save 6 figures and then still feel like I wasn't on the path. I mentioned going to RIAs. I remember there was an older gentleman there and he asked me how we were doing the deals. I explained it to him and he kind of chuckled. And it was just, if you've ever seen like movies where there's like some wise old, savant who knows the way, but he's waiting for the little grasshopper to be ready for the lesson. He kind of did one of those, right? He wasn't ready to share, but he kind of smirked and said, oh, okay. And walked away. And I'm like, why do you smirk like this? Like, not condescending, but just, I took it a little personal. Well, finally, I kind of just talked to him and he was the one who first introduced this idea of whether it be syndication or work with other people. And like, there are ways to structure this where you don't have to save up $100,000 to go buy a $300,000, $400,000 property. And that really just opened up, I think, our eyes to say, okay, maybe we should explore this more. And the pain point for me was like, I hadn't solved my goal. right? We talked about what got me started in this, right? Trying to insulate myself from bankruptcy, from the jobs and all that stuff. Well, the second time I was at a company that went into bankruptcy, I was like, no, this is what I was protecting myself from. And I wasn't really protected. I was equity rich. I had these deals where I had a decent amount of equity, but I didn't have the cash flow coming in and take care of all of our bills. So at that moment, I said, investing is right. To your point, I'm on the right path, but I may need to turn a little bit from where I'm headed today if I want to really reach my destination. And that combined made me say, okay, I think I need to revisit the working with other people thing and see if that's the path I want to go down.
Yeah, that's awesome. And to kind of continue on what we're talking about now, working with other people, but also something you said earlier, which is somewhere along the same lines. But what you said was when people started coming to you and saying, hey, you do the work, you let me know when I'll bring some money or something like that. You find something like that. And you started hearing that. And then you're like, wait a second, I can help these people. And it is so cool to be a operator, syndicator, where you can bring these deals, because especially right now, it's so hard to find deals that make sense if they're not overpriced and things like that. Like, it takes a lot of work, right? And then the whole closing process is 3 or 4 months long, depending on your terms, right? And that whole process is very stressful and takes a lot of time and effort. But being able to just offer people a equity share in the deal, ownership percentage in the deal by just bringing capital and being able to share, whatever you're doing, enhancing that community, providing safe, affordable housing to population is just something really cool. And it really leaves an impact on both the community and also the investors who are part owners of the deal as well. So
yeah, absolutely. I think it's a great way to do it. And I will tell you, I mentioned that what I did isn't the way I recommend, and I will come back. So what I meant by that is to say, what we ended up doing was way too much. And I stretched myself too thin. I was trying to manage the current portfolio we had. I was looking to grow into these larger apartments, but also to generate some more income, I started doing a couple flip projects. Mm-hmm. Keep in mind, I have a full-time job. My wife has a full-time job, and now we have 2 little kids. So I found myself running around trying to just do a whole lot, and got to the point where it just, was a challenge. We weren't finding the deals because my time was divided between checking on contractors at the flip projects and making sure everything was good on the existing properties. So what I would tell anyone is, if you have a busy life, if you got a full-time job, you got kids, you got things going on, if you really want to be active, by all means, do it. Roll your sleeves up, get at it. But if you just want the passive income, you just want to diversify your portfolio, you want to learn a little bit about this, don't take the job. I basically signed up for another job. And what I really wanted was a way to insulate myself from financial uncertainty. And what would have been a better approach at that time was to invest passively until I could create enough free time for myself to be fully active, because I already had an active portfolio that I could learn and grow on, and I could keep doing deals like that. I could do larger deals, and that would have given me the chance to still be a present father and present husband. But instead, I spent a lot of weekends either, going over to these flip projects or chasing down contractors or, doing all these other things. And I just think it was a lot. So my lesson is figure out how you get from where you want to be or where you're at today to where you want to be without so much stress and pain and feeling like you've got to do it all yourself.
Yeah, totally agree.
Yeah, exactly. And the whole thing is so that you don't have to do it all yourself, right? I mean, that's what brings this whole thing together, is that like you aren't in this alone and you don't have to be in this alone. And like, there are so many of us, there are so many people out there, right, who like want partners, need partners. Like, you can find where you're supposed to be in a real estate investment, whether that's active or passive, because both sides are needed all of the time. So it's huge.
So John, this has been such a pleasure chatting with you. You've provided so much value to our adventurous family. But before we end the show, this takes us to the Adventurous 4. These are 4 exploratory questions we ask all of our guests. So the first question we have for you, John, is where is one place you wish to travel to and why?
I would say India. My wife is from India, and my kids are very interested in the country. And I've never been. My wife obviously has been many times, but the kids have never been. So I think in the next probably 2 or 3 years, we'll take a family trip out there and spend some time, go around the big cities, but also try to find the neighborhood where she grew up.
Oh, that's cool.
That is cool. That would be wonderful. That's awesome. So the second question is, What is the one thing on your bucket list and how are you leveraging real estate investing to achieve it?
Ooh, I think the number one thing on my bucket list, geez.
Just one thing.
Well, one thing is I really want to take my father on a golf. So I'm looking to do that this year, hopefully. So, COVID's made everything a little weird, but yeah, I'd like to take him and my brother on a trip, just a little guys trip between the three of us to go out, spend some time together. And real estate is a way where you can basically buy back your time. My father's getting up there and I just want to make the most of the time we have. Don't know how much time any of us has, but on the same note, take advantage of what we do have in front of us. So that's something that's really important. And the fact that I can, pretty much schedule it and be remote and work from wherever gives me the flexibility thanks to real estate.
Just a quick question. Where were you thinking about going? Play some golf?
I don't know. We, or maybe out to Arizona or California is probably what we're thinking.
Gotcha. Cool.
Mike likes to golf.
Yeah, I golf.
We suck, by the way. So we're not good. None of us. We're not good. So we're going to have fun.
It's all about,
we still enjoy it.
Yeah, it's all about, camaraderie and being in the fresh outdoors. And yeah, it's great. So I love it.
Yeah.
But the third question we have for you, John, is what is one piece of advice for someone who wants to start passively investing?
Find people you can connect with. I think the biggest thing is it's easy to start with a deal or think about a deal. If you're going to invest passively, you're really entering into a new relationship. So get to know someone, figure out who is like-minded. Do they have the experience, the capability to run the investment? Do they have the team around them? Just really get to know them. And if you feel that comfort level small, I wouldn't invest your entire life savings. Understand that every investment has risk. Real estate by itself already has mitigations built in, particularly multifamily apartments, if they're already occupied apartment buildings. So you're buying a business that already exists. So it's not like you're creating something out of thin air. So I think some of the risk is already mitigated, but just selecting the right people to do business with is really your best thing. And if you have something that doesn't go well, or maybe you don't love it, try a different approach, try a different partner, try a different strategy, maybe do private lending, but figure out what your comfort level is. But you have to understand what your goal actually is. Mm-hmm. If you are investing and you realize, hey, this isn't exactly what you wanted, take the time to gather that awareness, understand what it is you're hoping to get out of investing so that you can find the right investment vehicle for you.
And that is great advice. Yeah. So thank you for that. And then the fourth and final question is, if you had unlimited resources available to you, how would you leave an impact?
Oh, man. I mean, one of the biggest things, and I'm part of this organization called Surge for Water, and Surge really invests in sustainable water solutions in various countries. And, we take things like running water for granted, and there are countries where they simply don't have that. Mm-hmm. So helping to invest in these communities where it's sustainable water, building wells, toilets, and sanitation systems. These communities actually, they get involved, they build it themselves. It's sustainable. It's not like, some groups come in and they, give you water or whatever. This is really teaching people to take care of themselves. And I think that is something that can go a long way, and just to help them, get some of these basic necessities that the rest of us take advantage of or take for granted.
No, that's great. I mean, just because, right, there's so many people in the world and we already have so much, it amazes me how much the rest of the world, or a lot of the rest of the world, needs. So no, that is phenomenal. So thank you for that.
Yeah, absolutely. So before we end the show, John, would you mind sharing with our adventurous family, how they can get a hold of you or reach out to you?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is just shoot me an email. If you would like to talk more about either investing or have a question, I'd love to follow up. You can shoot me an email at john@casmoncapital.com. Just put Adventures Real Estate in the title or the subject line, and I'd be happy to talk there.
Awesome.
You took our line. That's what we like to say. And if you reach out to John, let him know that you heard him on our podcast.
Well, there you go. You can repeat it.
Right.
If you XM Radio, Grant Cardone's got a commercial, and it's annoying because they say whatever the website is 8 times in a row. And there's this rule in marketing where you got to say it 7 times. So you got to tell them 3 or 4 times at least if you want them to actually do it. So make sure you tell them the email address, john@casmoncapital.com, 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 right? Just let them know. Hopefully they'll get it. And that's the best way to punch it in the memory.
We'll put john@casmoncapital.com in the show notes as well.
Now I get so many emails. I'm like, why did I do that? No, I'm kidding. Happily, please reach out. I'd love to talk.
John, thanks so much for being on with us today. It was a lot of fun. This episode, we laughed a lot, actually, which was great. learned a new marketing strategy. So I can't wait to repeat things over and over and over again. But thanks again. It was a pleasure.
Susie and Michael, thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. So until next time, explore more, adventure awaits.
Woo!